Hello, gentle viewers, and welcome back to another fun educational video on the wilderness process as it takes place within Forest Plan Revision. I'm Wilderness Wanda, and I will be your host today. Before we really jump in and get started, though, I would like to take a second to recap where we are in the process and what we've accomplished to date, and even to summarize the process before we jump into evaluation. So where we are in the process right now, we are actually revising our forest plan. Our forest plan is the document that says how each resource that the Carson National Forest is responsible for is going to be managed. This includes areas like timber, recreation, range, and water. So our plan is going on, about 30 years old now, so you can only imagine how much has changed over the last 30 years. Ecological landscapes have changed, social landscapes have changed, even forest management techniques have changed. So you can only imagine how out of date our forest plan is. So we're in the process right now of updating that plan. Now within the 2012 planning rule, we are required to take a look at all of the land across the Carson National Forest, except for areas that are already designated as wilderness, to see what other lands might potentially, could be, possibly, maybe included as wilderness further down in the process. So we have 4 steps that we follow to make that determination. The first step is inventory. Inventory is the step where we take a look at the physical attributes, what's physically on the landscape. Things like, are there structures present? Are there roads present? What's the size of the parcel that we're looking at? So those are some of the things that go into account when we're looking at inventory. Once inventory is complete, we take those inventoried lands and we move those into the second step, which is evaluation. Evaluation now asks the question, do these inventoried lands have wilderness character? And trust me, we're going to be getting into much more in depth on that question alone here in a few minutes. From evaluation, we move into analysis. Now we take a look at the lands and we look at, what are some management possibilities? What are the impacts? What are the benefits of looking at some of these lands for potential wilderness further down in the process? Okay, so once the analysis is complete, we move into recommendation. And this is where I say recommendation because the Forest Service actually does not have the authority to actually designate lands as wilderness. Only Congress can do that. So we can only make the recommendation. Now that's not to say that everything that we started with is going to be recommended for wilderness. You're actually going to see as we move through this process that we're actually kind of going through a funnel effect. So the inventory gives us our starting point. As we go through evaluation, analysis, and even down to recommendation, these lands are going to get more and more focused as we move through the process. And they're actually going to get whittled down more and more as we move through the process as well. So before we start talking about evaluation, I'd like to go ahead and summarize the inventory. This is a step that we just recently completed, and we have developed a map, an inventory map that shows the lands that made it through the inventory step. So I'm going to show you the map in a second, but what I'd like to do is explain what you're going to see on the map. When you take a look at the map, you're going to see a lot of blue. This blue are the lands that made it through the inventory process. Up on the top of the map, you're also going to see a little bit of purple. Based on public comment, these are areas that we added back into the inventory based on what we heard. So let's go ahead and take a look at the map. Wow, there is a lot of blue on that map. So does that mean we're going to take this and recommend it for wilderness later? Absolutely not. Again, we are at the top, at the widest part of that funnel. So this is giving us a broad look and a starting point so that we have lands that we can evaluate for wilderness character. So now that we have inventoried lands, we are ready to start the evaluation process. Again, this is the step where we start looking at the inventoried lands to see if they have wilderness character. And to explain that process a little bit more is our very own Elisa Radcliffe. She is a member of our Forest Plan Revision team, and she'll be talking to you a little bit more about evaluation and the characteristics that go into evaluation.
Hi everyone, I'm sure everyone is wondering what the evaluation process is and how the Carson National Forest is going to do it. So I'm here to explain simple answers for those questions. The evaluation process is where the Carson National Forest takes a look at the inventoried lands from the inventory process, or the blue areas on the inventory map, to see if they have what it takes to become possible recommended wilderness. We do this by looking at individual inventoried areas to see if they have the 5 wilderness characteristics as described in the 1964 Wilderness Preservation Act. These 5 characteristics include apparent naturalness, solitude or unconfined recreation, size, outstanding values, and manageability.
So thank you, Elisa. And now that we have the characteristics, let's go ahead and break them down a little bit more. So when we're looking at evaluation, again, it's to determine if the inventoried lands have wilderness character. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have 5 characteristics that are outlined in the Wilderness Preservation Act that gives us guidance on how to determine if these lands have wilderness character. So we have the 5 characteristics, and going along with those 5 characteristics, we actually have considerations for each characteristic on how we might apply that characteristic. So let's talk about these a little bit more for each characteristic. So the first one was apparent naturalness. So what are some of the things we might consider for apparent naturalness? We might look at how primitive does the landscape look? Is there evidence of human activity? What's happening in the area? Are there improvements on the landscape? So those are some of the things we might consider for apparent naturalness. The second one, solitude and unconfined recreation. Some considerations might be, well, are there opportunities for solitude and unconfined recreation in these areas? What's happening on adjacent lands that might impact solitude on these areas? So those are some of the things we might consider when we're looking at solitude and unconfined recreation. Now when we get to the size characteristic, that one's a little more cut and dry. The Wilderness Act does tell us to look at 5,000 acres or more. Now if you have good justification, you can include parcels that are less than 5,000 acres, but the rule of thumb is 5,000 acres or larger. So the fourth characteristic that we'll look at has to do with outstanding values that might be present on the landscape. These include values such as ecological values, scientific values, educational values, even historic values. So some of the things you might consider in this category are there outstanding geological features on the landscape? Are there outstanding water values on the landscape? And that type of thing. So the fifth characteristic is manageability. Manageability answers the question, can the area be managed to preserve its wilderness characteristics now and into the future? So what are some considerations that might come under a manageability? Some things we might consider are private land in holdings. Are there private lands within the parcel of land that we're looking at? Mining and other claims might also come into the picture as well as a consideration for manageability. So those are the 5 characteristics in a nutshell. So based on your input, we added 2 considerations to the manageability characteristic. We added traditional, historical, and cultural uses and how that might play into manageability. We also added departed landscapes. So what are departed landscapes? Basically, departed landscapes takes a look at the health of the landscape. Is it healthy? Is it not? If it's not healthy, how far away is it from its healthy condition? So those are the 5 wilderness characteristics that we look to see if a land has wilderness character. Now in applying those characteristics, we're not taking them and applying them in isolation. We are actually taking all 5 and painting a whole picture. And it's really important to remember that the characteristics have considerations. These aren't hard and fast rules, and they're also not black and white criteria. So you're going to have a varying scale of how these fit into the landscape. Which brings us to, why are we here today? Well, like an inventory, your feedback really helped us shape the inventory and create the final inventory map. So again, we would like to ask your help in helping us shape the evaluation and the evaluation map. So we would love to hear your thoughts on the considerations. Are there other things that we should be considering? Are there other things we should be expanding on? And we would also like to have your help on applying those to the map itself. So as we move through evaluation, is this the last chance that you're going to have to provide feedback and comment into this process? Absolutely not. We are only in step 2 and we are slowly making our way down through the funnel. We still have analysis and recommendation coming up, and you'll have plenty of opportunity to provide feedback and comment as we go through the next steps. So that's pretty much everything in a nutshell. I really want to thank everybody for coming out and joining us tonight. We really appreciate your participation in helping us through this process. I know I've thrown a lot out at you. If you have any questions, please let us know. If you have any ideas, we would love to discuss them with you. So that's all for now. I'm Wilderness Wanda signing off, and we will see you next time.